The iron bars pressed cold against Adeline's forehead, but the man breathing heavily on the other side felt hot enough to burn the world down. They called him a monster. They said Roman Kincaid killed 3 men with his bare hands and would kill anyone who got too close. The entire town of Copper Creek was terrified of him. But as the sheriff cocked his shotgun and the angry mob gathered outside with ropes and torches, Adeline realized this monster was her only hope. She fell to her knees in the dirt, looked into his dark, furious eyes, and whispered the 3 words that would change everything. "Please, marry me." The stagecoach lurched to a halt, kicking up a cloud of red dust that coated the back of Adeline Ross's throat. She coughed, patting her chest with a gloved hand, and peered out the window. Copper Creek, Wyoming, looked exactly as she feared, harsh, unforgiving, and dangerously quiet. She stepped out, clutching her carpet bag. She had traveled 2,000 miles from Boston, fleeing a scandal that wasn't her fault and a stepfather who viewed her as a bargaining chip. She had nothing left but a letter in her pocket from a man named Tobias Miller, a rancher who had advertised for a wife. He was her safety net. "You, Adeline Ross?" Adeline turned to see a man leaning against a hitching post. He was dressed in a suit that cost more than the entire general store behind him, but his eyes were like flint. He chewed on a toothpick, looking her up and down with an unsettling familiarity. "I am," Adeline said, straightening her spine. "I'm looking for Mr. Tobias Miller. He's expecting me." The man chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Tobias ain't expecting much of anything these days, darling." "Unless he's expecting worms." Adeline's stomach dropped. I don't understand." "Dead," the man said flatly. "Kicked by a mule 3 days ago. Buried him yesterday." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Tobias was dead. Her safety net was gone. She had $12 to her name and no return ticket. Surely he left instructions? The ranch? The man pushed off the post and walked closer. He smelled of expensive tobacco and stale whiskey. "The ranch reverts to the bank, seeing as he had no kin. And since I am the bank in these parts, as well as the mayor, it belongs to me. Name's Barnaby Statham." Statham smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Now, a pretty thing like you shouldn't be stranded. I run a saloon down the street, the Gilded Lily. I've got rooms upstairs. You can work off your stagecoach fare. The men here, they appreciate a refined woman." The implication was clear, and it made Adeline's skin crawl. She gripped her bag tighter. "I am not a saloon girl, Mr. Statham. I came here to be a wife." "Well, there ain't no husband for you here." Statham sneered, his polite facade slipping. "Unless you want to marry a corpse. You've got until sundown to pay for a room at the hotel or take my offer. Vagrancy is a crime in my town, Miss Ross." Adeline backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She turned and walked briskly toward the only building that looked official, the sheriff's office. She needed legal advice, not a job in a brothel. Inside, the air was thick with heat and the smell of stale coffee. Sheriff Higgins, a portly man with sweat stains under his arms, looked up from a game of solitaire. "Help you, miss?" "I need to know the law," Adeline said, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Miller, if I was his betrothed, do I have a claim to his land?" Higgins laughed. "Not unless you got a ring on your finger and a paper signed by the preacher. Statham takes it all." Is there anyone else?" She hated the desperation in her voice. "Anyone looking for a wife? I can cook, I can sew, I can keep books." Higgins exchanged a glance with his deputy, a young kid cleaning a rifle. "Town's mostly drifters and miners, miss. None of them got a pot to piss in. The only landowners are Statham's men. There's Kincaid," the deputy muttered, not looking up. Higgins kicked the deputy's chair. "Shut it, boy. Kincaid don't count." "Who is Kincaid?" Adeline asked, seizing on the name. "Roman Kincaid." Higgins spat the name out like a curse. "He owns the biggest tract of timber and water in the valley. High Ridge. Prime land. Statham's been trying to buy it for 5 years." "Where is he?" Adeline asked. "Does he need a wife?" Higgins stood up, walked to a heavy iron door at the back of the office, and slid open a small viewing slot. "He don't need a wife, lady. He needs a priest. It's hanging on Friday." Adeline stepped closer, drawn by a strange pull. "What did he do? He's a savage," Higgins said. Mountain Man came down 3 nights ago and tore apart 3 of Statham's hands in the saloon. Beat him near to death. We finally got him caged, but he's wild. Statham wants him hanged for attempted murder and disturbing the peace. Attempted? Adeline whispered. So, he didn't kill them? Might as well have, Higgins shrugged. Once he hangs, Statham gets High Ridge at auction. A plan, insane and terrifying, began to form in Adeline's mind. It was reckless. It was dangerous. But it was better than the Gilded Lily. If he has a wife, Adeline asked slowly, what happens to his land when he dies? Higgins squinted at her. If he's married, the widow inherits. State law. Statham wouldn't get a pebble. Adeline looked at the heavy iron door. Let me see him. You're crazy, Higgins scoffed. I have $5, she lied. It was nearly half her fortune. She placed the coins on the desk. $5 for 5 minutes. Higgins swiped the coins. 5 minutes. But don't get too close to the bars. He bites. The back room was dark, smelling of damp earth and unwashed bodies. There was only one cell, occupied by a shadow sitting on the edge of a cot. As Adeline's eyes adjusted to the gloom, the shadow moved. He stood up, and she took an involuntary step back. Roman Kincaid was massive. He had to be at least 6'4", with shoulders that spanned the width of the narrow bunk. His hair was long, matted with dirt, and a thick beard covered half his face. But it was his eyes that held her, pale blue, piercing, and filled with a cold, simmering rage. He walked to the bars, his movements silent like a predator. His shirt was torn, revealing bruises and cuts, likely from his arrest. What do you want, little bird? His voice was a low rumble, vibrating in the small space. It wasn't the grunt of a savage. It was deep and surprisingly clear. Adeline swallowed hard, clutching her skirt. My name is Adeline Ross. I have a proposition for you, Roman snorted, turning his back on her. I don't have money for a lawyer, and I don't need a prayer. I don't offer prayers, Adeline said, stepping closer to the bars, ignoring the sheriff's warning. I offer revenge. Roman stopped. He turned his head slowly, looking at her over his shoulder. Revenge? Statham, she said the name clearly. He wants your land. He's going to hang you on Friday, and by Monday, he'll own High Ridge. He'll cut down your trees and strip the land. Roman turned fully around, gripping the iron bars. His knuckles were white. He won't get it. I'll burn it down first. You can't burn it down from inside a cell, Adeline pointed out, her voice gaining strength. But you can keep it from him if you marry me. Roman stared at her for a long moment, then threw his head back and laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. Marry you? I'm a dead man walking, lady. What good is a wife to a corpse? A widow inherits, Adeline said quickly. If we marry before you, before Friday, the land becomes mine. Statham gets nothing, and I promise you, I will hold on to it. I will never sell to him. Roman leaned down, his face inches from hers through the bars. She could smell the pine and sweat on him. And what do you get out of this, little bird? A rich widow by the weekend? Protection, she admitted, and a home. Statham. He implied I would have to work in his saloon if I didn't find a way to support myself. I won't do that. I would rather marry a condemned man. Roman studied her face, looking for the lie. He saw the fear in her gray eyes, but he also saw steel. She wasn't trembling anymore. You're a fool, Roman muttered, backing away. Statham will just kill you too once I'm gone, or he'll find a way to annul it. Not if we consummate it, Adeline blurted out, her face flushing crimson. The silence in the cell was deafening. Roman looked at her, his eyebrows raised. You realize what you're asking? You think I'm going to take you right here on this dirty floor with the sheriff outside? We don't have to actually do it, Adeline whispered. We just need witnesses to say we spent the night together as man and wife. The sheriff can be bought. I saw him take my money. Roman paced the small cell. He was like a caged tiger, hated Statham with every fiber of his being. The thought of that greaseball mayor taking his family's mountain made his blood boil. And this woman, she was desperate enough to tie herself to a monster. There's something you don't know, Roman said quietly. Statham didn't just provoke a fight. He sent men to my cabin. They didn't find what they were looking for. What were they looking for? Gold, Roman said. Everyone thinks High Ridge is full of timber. It is. But my father found a vein of gold in the caves up north before he died. Statham knows. If you inherit that land, you inherit a war. I've fought wars before, Adeline said, thinking of her stepfather. I can handle a bully. He's not a bully. He's a snake. Roman returned to the bars. He looked at her hands. Delicate, soft. Why me? Why not just leave town? I have $12 and nowhere to go, she said simply. Please, Roman, marry me. Let me ruin Statham's plan. It's the last thing you can do to hurt him. Roman looked at the door where Higgins was sitting. He looked back at Adeline. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of amusement. Hey, Higgins, Roman roared. The door flew open. Quiet down back there! Get the preacher! Roman yelled, a dark grin spreading across his face. And get Statham! I want him to see this! Higgins waddled to the bars, confused. See what? My wedding, Roman said, reaching through the bars to grab Adeline's hand. His grip was rough, calloused, and shockingly warm. Miss Ross and I are getting hitched. Higgins' jaw dropped. You can't be serious. It's my last request, Roman growled. Deny a dying man his last request, and I'll haunt you till your heart stops. Adeline squeezed Roman's hand back. It was done. She was engaged to the beast of Copper Creek. Now she just had to keep him alive long enough to figure out how to save them both. The wedding was a grotesque parody of a sacred event. It took place an hour later, the sun already dipping below the horizon, casting long, blood-red shadows across the jailhouse floor. Sheriff Higgins had dragged a terrified parson, Reverend Albright, away from his dinner. The Reverend smelled of pot roast and fear, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold his Bible. But the real presence in the room was Barnaby Statham. He stood by the door, flanked by 2 hired guns, his face a mask of apoplectic fury. He looked from Adeline to Roman, his jaw working furiously. This is a farce, Statham snarled, his voice tight. Higgins, I'll have your badge for this. You can't let a condemned animal get married. Law says a man has a right to settle his affairs before he meets his maker, Roman said, his voice eerily calm from behind the bars. He was enjoying Statham's impotent rage. And Miss Ross, here is my affair. Adeline stood on the free side of the bars. She had tried to tidy her hair, but she still felt grimy from travel and fear. Roman reached through the iron lattice. This time, his touch was gentler. He took her small, gloved hand in his massive, scarred paw. The contrast was startling. Get on with it, preacher, Roman commanded. Reverend Albright stumbled through the service, skipping verses and slurring words, desperate to be out of the volatile room. Do you, Roman Clay Kincaid, take this woman? I do, Roman said, his eyes fixed not on Adeline, but on Statham. It was a vow of defiance, not love. And do you, Adeline Beatrice Ross? Adeline looked at Roman. Up close, beneath the grime and the beard, she saw the exhaustion in his face, the lines around his eyes that spoke of a hard, lonely life. For a second, she wasn't marrying him for land or protection. She was marrying him because no one else would stand by him. I do, she whispered. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife. The Reverend slammed the Bible shut. God have mercy on your souls. Now get out, Roman barked at the room. He glared at Statham. All of you. My wife and I need our wedding night. Statham looked like he was about to draw his pistol right there. You think this changes anything? Kincaid? You still swing at dawn. And you, Mrs. Kincaid, he spat the name, enjoy your one night as a mountain man's whore. Tomorrow, the widow Ross will be looking for work again. He stormed out, followed by the Reverend and the guards. Sheriff Higgins looked uncomfortable. I gotta lock the outer door, Roman. Standard procedure for conjugal visits. Just leave the lantern, Higgins, and don't come back till sunup. The heavy outer door clanged shut, plunging them in of silence, save for the distant piano music from the Gilded Lily. Adeline stood outside the cell, shivering slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. Roman sat on his bunk, watching her. You can come in, you know, he said dryly. Higgins left the keys on the desk. He knows I won't run tonight. Adeline hesitated, then grabbed the heavy key ring. Her hands shook as she unlocked the cell door. It creaked open. She stepped inside, the space suddenly feeling incredibly small. Roman didn't move from the bunk. "Don't worry, little bird, I'm not going to touch you." The deal was a marriage certificate, not a performance. Adeline let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She sat on the only other surface available, an overturned wooden crate in the corner. "Thank you," she said softly. "Don't thank me yet. You just tied yourself to a sinking ship." He leaned back against the cold stone wall, closing his eyes. "Why did you really do it? That story about Statham's saloon? You're too tough for that to be the only reason." Adeline looked at her hands in her lap. "Back east, my stepfather, he tried to sell me off to a man 3 times my age to cover his gambling debts. A cruel man. I ran away. I came here because Tobias Miller was kind in his letters. I wanted to be safe. When I saw you, when I heard what Statham was doing," she looked up at him. "I realized safety isn't something you find out here. It's something you have to fight for. And I'm tired of running." Roman opened one blue eye. He studied her for a long time in the dim lantern light. The spoiled Boston debutante he imagined was fading, replaced by something stronger, something fiercer. "My father built the cabin on High Ridge," Roman said quietly, the first piece of personal history he'd offered. "He died in a mine collapse when I was 16. I've spent half my life keeping men like Statham off that land. It's the only thing I care about." "Then we have the same goal," Adeline said. "We both just want a place that's ours." He grunted a non-committal response and turned away to try and sleep. Adeline curled up on the cold floor using her carpet bag as a pillow. Neither of them slept. They lay in the dark, listening to the town settle down, 2 strangers bound by a desperate contract, waiting for the sun to rise on execution day. Adeline's heart pounded rhythmically against the hard floor, a countdown to widowhood. Dawn arrived with a sickening speed. The sky turned a bruised purple, then a pale, sickly yellow. The noise outside began early, the sound of hammering. They were building the gallows. Roman sat up, stretching stiff muscles. He looked at Adeline, who had dozed off in an uncomfortable knot on the floor. She looked fragile in sleep, her pale hair escaping its pins. "Time to wake up, Mrs. Kincaid," he said, his voice rough with mourning and impending death. She jolted awake, eyes wide with panic. Then reality crashed down on her. Today was Friday. Higgins arrived with coffee that tasted like mud and 2 deputies. They were solemn, avoiding Roman's gaze. "It's time, Roman," Higgins said. He looked at Adeline. "Ma'am, you have to go. Wait out front." Adeline stood up, her legs trembling. She walked to Roman. Impulsively, she reached up and touched his arm. It was hard as granite beneath his torn shirt. "I won't let him win," she whispered fiercely. "I promise you, Roman, I will hold High Ridge." Roman looked down at her. For a brief moment, the icy mask broke, revealing a flicker of regret. "Stay away from the caves, Adeline. The gold is cursed. It killed my father. It's killing me. Let the mountain have it." He was led out in chains. Adeline was ushered out the front door of the sheriff's office into the blinding morning light. The main street of Copper Creek was packed. Miners, ranchers, saloon girls, and drifters had gathered. A hanging was entertainment. In the center of the street stood the newly constructed wooden platform. Barnaby Statham stood on it, looking smug in a fresh suit, preening for the crowd. Roman was led up the steps. He stood tall, towering over his executioners. He didn't look frightened. He looked bored and angry. The noose was placed around his neck. Statham stepped forward to address the crowd. "Citizens of Copper Creek, today we see justice. This man, this savage, Roman Kincaid, attacked honest businessmen in cold blood. We are ridding our civilized town of a menace." A few people cheered, but many stayed silent. They feared Kincaid, but they hated Statham more. Adeline stood near the crowd, her heart feeling like it was being squeezed by a vise. She had to do something. The law had failed. The marriage trick had only secured the future, not the present. As the executioner moved to the lever, Statham leaned in close to Roman, whispering something that made Roman's eyes widen in fury. Roman lunged, straining against the ropes, roaring a sound that made the crowd step back in terror. "He's confessing!" Statham yelled, panicking. "Pull the lever! Do it now! No!" Adeline screamed. She pushed through the crowd, scrambling up the steps of the gallows before a deputy could stop her. She stood next to her husband, facing the mob. "Listen to me," she yelled, her voice cracking. "Barnaby Statham is a liar. He doesn't want justice. He wants gold." The word gold hit the crowd like a thunderclap. A hush fell over the street. Even Statham froze. "What is this nonsense?" Statham sputtered. "Get that hysterical woman off the stage. Roman's land. High Ridge." Adeline shouted, pointing towards the towering peaks in the distance. "Statham knows there's a gold vein in the North Caves. That's why he sent men to kill Roman. That's why he's hanging him today. He wants to steal it from the Kincaid family." It was a gamble. Roman had told her the gold was cursed, but it was the only weapon she had left. The crowd began to murmur. The miners, men who spent their lives chasing dust, suddenly looked at Statham with suspicion. "Is that true? Barnaby?" yelled an old prospector near the front. "You trying to claim jump a dead man? She's lying! She's his whore! She'll say anything!" Statham yelled, sweat popping on his forehead. "He's my husband!" Adeline roared back, holding up her hand. It lacked a ring, but the conviction in her voice was undeniable. "We were married last night. The land is mine. Statham, you get nothing." The crowd was turning. It was chaos. Statham, seeing his control slipping, grabbed the lever himself. "Hang him! Damn you!" He threw the lever. The trapdoor dropped with a sickening thud, but Roman didn't fall. Just as the door dropped, Roman had thrown his entire massive weight backward. The sudden, violent jerk against the anchor rope snapped the overhead crossbeam of the hastily built gallows. Wood splintered with the sound of a gunshot. The entire structure collapsed. Roman fell 10 feet into the dust below, the heavy beam crashing down next to him, missing his head by inches. The noose was still around his neck, but the rope was slack. Adeline was thrown to the stage floor but scrambled up, looking over the edge. Roman was alive. He was coughing, tearing at the rope around his throat with his bound hands. "Get him!" Statham screamed, pointing from the wreckage of the platform. "Shoot him!" But the crowd was in a frenzy now, the promise of gold and the spectacle of the collapse sending them into a riot. Fists flew. Deputies were overwhelmed. Roman ripped the noose off, the thick hemp burning his neck. He saw Statham drawing a pearl-handled revolver. Roman didn't run away. He ran up. He vaulted the wreckage of the gallows, crashing into Statham just as the gun went off. The bullet went wild. Roman didn't punch him. He simply headbutted the mayor with the force of a battering ram. Statham crumpled, unconscious, his nose shattered. Roman looked around wildly. His eyes found Adeline on the edge of the broken platform. "Adeline, move!" he roared. He grabbed the nearest deputy, throwing the man into 2 others like a bowling pin. He reached up and grabbed Adeline by the waist, swinging her down from the platform as if she weighed nothing. "To the livery stable!" he ordered, pushing her through the chaotic mob. "Run!" They rode hard for 2 hours, stopping only when the horses were blowing hard and foam flecked their necks. They were deep in the foothills now, the air thinner and cooler, smelling of pine resin and damp earth. Roman reined in his stolen roan mare. He slid off, his movements stiff and pained. He nearly collapsed when his boots hit the ground, grabbing the saddle horn for support. Adeline dismounted quickly, her stolen gelding skittish. "Roman, are you all right?" He was pale beneath his beard, sweat cutting tracks through the grime on his face. The rope burn around his neck was an angry crimson welt, and his shirt was stuck to his side with drying blood, a graze from a deputy's bullet during the escape that he hadn't mentioned. We need to keep moving," he gasped. "Statham's men, they'll track us. You can't ride like this," Adeline said, her voice firm. She tied the horses to a sapling and approached him. "Let me see your side." He tried to brush her away. "It's nothing, a scratch. Stop being a stubborn mule, Roman Kincaid. I'm safe, remember? That means I'm in charge of patching you up when you do something stupid like collapsing a gallows on yourself." He looked at her, surprised by her tone. He was too exhausted to fight. He leaned against a boulder, letting her carefully peel back the torn fabric of his shirt. The bullet graze along his ribs was nasty, deep and bleeding sluggishly, but it hadn't hit anything vital. Adeline ripped a strip from her white petticoat, the second time that garment had served a purpose today, and used water from his canteen to clean the wound. He hissed in pain but didn't pull away. She bound it tightly. "That told them about the gold," he said grumpily, looking back down the trail towards Copper Creek. "That was foolish, Adeline. You just put a target on our backs bigger than the one Statham painted. It saved your neck, she retorted, tying off the bandage. It turned the mob. If I hadn't said it, you'd be dead. He looked down at her. She was right. This city girl, this delicate little bird, had just outmaneuvered the slickest politician in the territory and incited a riot to save him. Your trouble, Adeline Ross, he murmured, a hint of grudging respect in his tone. Adeline Kincaid, she corrected him, meeting his gaze. He held her look for a moment, the tension between them shifting again. They weren't just allies of convenience anymore. They were co-conspirators bonded by blood and chaos. Come on, he grunted, pushing himself off the rock. Another hour. We'll be at the cabin before dark. It's defensible there. The ride up to High Ridge was treacherous. The trail was barely a goat path, winding up sheer cliff faces and through dense, ancient forests that blocked out the sun. This was Roman's world. Brutal, silent, and majestic. Adeline felt small here, an intruder in a land that didn't care if she lived or died. They crested a final ridge just as the sun was setting. Nestled in a high alpine meadow, protected on 3 sides by towering granite walls, sat a cabin. It was built of massive logs, squat and sturdy, with a stone chimney smoking gently. A corral nearby held 2 mules who brayed at their arrival. It wasn't a shack. It was a fortress built by hand. Roman practically fell off his horse when they arrived. A large, grizzled wolf dog bounded off the porch, barking menacingly until Roman gave a sharp whistle. The dog immediately turned into a whimpering puppy, licking Roman's hand. "This is Buster," Roman said, leaning heavily on the porch railing. "He hates everyone but me. He'll probably hate you too." Charmed, Adeline muttered, eyeing the beast. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly neat. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall. There was a sturdy table, a few chairs, and a large bed in the corner covered in thick furs. It smelled of wood smoke and dried herbs. Roman stumbled toward the bed and collapsed onto it, face down, fully clothed. He was asleep within seconds. Adeline stood in the middle of the room. Silence pressed in on her. She was miles from civilization, married to a wanted man who was currently unconscious, with a half-wild wolf watching her every move and an angry mayor likely organizing a posse back in town. She looked at the man on the bed. Her husband. The monster everyone feared. He looked vulnerable now, broken and exhausted. She walked to the fireplace and stoked the dying embers. She found a cast iron pot and some dried jerky. She would make a stew. They needed to eat. They needed strength. Statham would come. The whole town might come now, hungry for the gold she had foolishly revealed. But looking around the sturdy cabin, feeling the cold mountain air seep through the chinking, Adeline felt a strange sensation. For the first time since she left Boston, she didn't feel afraid. She felt ready. She was Adeline Kincaid, joint owner of High Ridge, and she was prepared to fight for her home. 3 days passed in a blur of snow and tense silence. High Ridge lived up to its name. A storm rolled in the night they arrived, sealing the mountain pass with 4 feet of powder. It was a blessing in disguise. It gave Roman time to heal, and it gave Adeline time to learn. The cabin wasn't just a home, it was an armory. Roman had rifles staged by every window, ammunition boxes under the floorboards, and jars of black powder on the high shelves. "He'll come when the snow melts," Roman said one evening, sharpening a massive Bowie knife by the fire. His shirt was off, the bandage around his ribs stark white against his tanned, scarred skin. He moved with a stiff grace now, the wound healing thanks to Adeline's constant care. "Let him come," Adeline said. She was kneading dough for biscuits, her hands covered in flour. She wore one of Roman's old flannel shirts, cinched at the waist with a rope. The Boston debutante was gone. The woman standing there had calluses forming on her palms. "We have the high ground." Roman stopped sharpening. He watched her, a look of intense, quiet hunger in his eyes. The forced proximity had broken down the walls between them. They slept in the same bed for warmth, back to back, but every morning the distance between them shrank. "You should have run, Adeline," he said, his voice low, "when you had the chance. Statham won't just arrest us. He'll burn this place to the ground with us inside." "I told you," Adeline said, turning to face him. "I'm not running anymore. Besides, I have a husband to look after." Roman stood up, crossing the room in 2 strides. He stopped right in front of her. The air in the cabin suddenly felt very thin. He reached out, his rough thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I ain't much of a husband," he rasped. "I'm a hunted man with a price on his head." "You're the only man I've ever met who keeps his word," she whispered, leaning into his touch. He kissed her then, not like the defiant performance at the jail, but with a desperate, consuming passion. It was a claiming. Adeline wrapped her flower-dusted arms around his neck, pulling him closer. For a moment, the war outside didn't exist. There was only the fire, the snow, and the man who made her feel safer in a siege than she ever had in a mansion. But the peace couldn't last. 2 mornings later, the dog, Buster, began to growl, a low, rumbling vibration that shook his entire body. Roman was instantly awake, rolling out of bed and grabbing his Winchester before his feet hit the floor. "Adeline! Floor!" "Now," he commanded. Adeline dropped to the floorboards just as the front window shattered. A bullet thudded into the log wall inches from where her head had been a second before. "They're here!" Roman roared. He returned fire, the boom of the rifle deafening in the small space. Outside, the snow had melted enough for horses. Statham hadn't come alone. Through the cracks in the shutters, Adeline could see at least 20 men spreading out along the tree line. They weren't deputies. They were hired guns, judging by their mismatched clothes and reckless shooting. "Come out, Kincaid!" Statham's voice echoed from behind a cluster of rocks. "Throw out the girl, and we might let you die quick! Go to hell, Statham!" Roman yelled back, firing 2 shots in rapid succession. A scream from the trees confirmed he hadn't missed. "Reload for me," Roman ordered, sliding a pistol across the floor to Adeline. Adeline's hands shook, but she did it. She jammed cartridges into the cylinder, snapping it shut and sliding it back to him. They fell into a rhythm. Roman moved from window to window, a ghost in the smoke, picking off attackers with terrifying precision. Adeline kept the weapons fed, but there were too many of them. "They're flanking us," Adeline shouted, seeing movement near the corral. "They're trying to set fire to the stables. Damn it!" Roman growled. "Adeline, the trapdoor under the rug. Open it." She scrambled to the rug, throwing it aside and heaving open the heavy wooden hatch. Beneath was a dark crawl space. "Get in," Roman said. "There's a tunnel. It leads to the root cellar behind the ridge. Go." "Not without you," she screamed over the gunfire. "I have to hold them off." "No!" Adeline grabbed a jar of black powder from the shelf. Her eyes were wild. "We go together, or we blow this place up with them inside." Roman looked at her, stunned by her ferocity. A bullet pinged off the cast iron stove. The front door was beginning to splinter under the force of a battering ram. "Crazy woman," Roman muttered, grabbing her arm. "Fine. Into the hole. Now!" They dropped into the damp earth just as the front door gave way with a crash. Roman kicked the support beam of the trap door, collapsing a pile of heavy firewood on top of it to hide their escape. They crawled through the narrow, suffocating tunnel, dirt falling into their hair. Above them, they could hear the heavy boots of Statham's men storming the cabin, overturning tables, smashing the life they had just started to build. "Where are they?" They heard Statham scream, muffled through the floorboards. "Find them! Find the entrance to the mine!" Roman pushed Adeline forward. "Keep moving! We're going to the caves!" "If he wants the gold so bad, I'm going to give it to him." The air in the tunnel was thick enough to chew. It smelled of wet clay, rotting roots, and the metallic tang of fear. Adeline crawled on her hands and knees, the rough dirt scraping her skin raw, following the sound of Roman breathing ahead of her. Above them, the heavy thud of boots vibrated through the wooden ceiling of the tunnel. Dust sifted down into their hair. Statham's men were tearing the cabin apart. "Keep moving," Roman whispered, his voice tight with pain. The crawl space was narrow, barely wide enough for his broad shoulders. He was dragging his injured leg, the wound on his ribs likely tearing open with every movement. "Where does this go?" Adeline gasped, coughing as she swallowed a mouthful of grit. "The ridge," Roman grunted. "Behind the tree line." They crawled for what felt like an eternity, the darkness pressing against Adeline's chest like a physical weight. Finally, a draft of icy air hit her face. Roman kicked out a screen of brush and tumbled out into the blinding white light of the snowy mountainside. He reached back, grabbing Adeline's wrist and pulling her out. They were covered in mud, looking like creatures birthed from the earth itself. They lay in the snow for a second, gasping for the thin, high-altitude air. "We can't stop," Roman said, forcing himself up. He swayed, clutching his side. Fresh blood was seeping through his shirt, staining the snow at his feet. "They'll find the tunnel entrance any minute." Adeline scrambled up, grabbing his arm to steady him. "You're bleeding again." "Doesn't matter," he snapped, though his eyes were soft when they met hers. "We have to make the caves. The Devil's Throat. It's the only place we can hold them off." The climb to the cave entrance was a nightmare. The path was a deer trail, slick with ice and hidden by snowdrifts. Below them, the sound of shouting drifted up on the wind. Statham had found the tunnel. They moved like hunted animals, slipping and scrambling over gray granite boulders. Adeline's lungs burned, her legs screaming with exertion, but she refused to let go of Roman. He was the mountain man, the beast of the wild, but right now he was running on sheer will, and she was his crutch. They reached the gaping maw of the cave just as a rifle crack echoed off the canyon walls. A bullet chipped the stone 5 feet to their left. "Inside!" Roman roared, shoving Adeline into the gloom. The transition was jarring. They went from blinding white snow to absolute, suffocating darkness. The air inside the mine was stagnant, heavy with the scent of sulfur and ancient, undisturbed dust. Roman didn't hesitate. He knew this place by touch. He grabbed a lantern from a rusted hook near the entrance and struck a match against the rock wall. The flame flared to life, casting long, dancing shadows against the jagged ceiling. The mine was held up by timber supports that looked as old as time, bowing under the weight of the mountain. "Go back," Roman ordered, pointing deeper into the throat of the cave. "There's a second chamber." "Hide behind the rockfall. What are you going to do?" Adeline asked, her voice echoing in the vast space. Roman walked to a wooden crate sitting near a support beam. He pried the lid off. Inside sat sticks of dynamite, sweating nitroglycerin, unstable and deadly. "My father left this here," Roman said, his voice echoing with a grim finality. "He died trying to get the gold out. It seems fitting it ends here." He began to rig a fuse, his large hands surprisingly steady. "Roman," Adeline realized what he was doing. She stepped toward him. "You're not just setting a trap. You're bringing the roof down." "It's the only way to stop Statham," Roman said, not looking up. "He won't stop, Adeline. He has the sheriff, the judge, the governor. If we walk out of here, he'll hunt us to the ends of the earth. The only way we're free is if he's buried." "And us?" Adeline demanded. "How do we get out?" Roman paused. He looked at the entrance where the sunlight was a distant square of white. Then he looked at her. "There's a ventilation shaft in the back. A chimney. It's tight, but you'll fit. I'll make sure you get up." "I'm not leaving you," she said, planting her feet. "You have to!" Roman roared, the sound bouncing off the walls. "I can't climb it, Adeline. Not with this rib. I'll stay here and make sure the fuse blows. You run!" Before they could argue further, voices echoed from the tunnel mouth. "I see a light! They're in the mine!" It was Statham. Roman grabbed Adeline by the shoulders, his grip bruising. "Go. Hide. Now." He shoved her toward the shadows. Adeline stumbled back, hiding behind a massive slab of fallen granite, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She watched as Roman turned to face the entrance, standing tall, the rifle held loosely in hand, the other resting near the dynamite. Statham entered first, flanked by 6 of his hired guns. They stopped short when they saw the size of the cavern. "End of the line! Kincaid!" Statham shouted. He was panting, his expensive suit torn, his face flushed with the thrill of the chase. Nowhere left to run. Roman didn't raise his rifle. He simply stepped aside, gesturing to the wall behind him with a mock bow. "I'm not running, Barnaby. I'm waiting. You wanted it? Here it is." The lantern light caught it. A vein of gold as thick as a man's arm, winding through the quartz wall like a river of fire. It was breathtaking. It was a fortune beyond comprehension. Statham's jaw dropped. The gun in his hand lowered. The greed in the room was palpable. It sucked the oxygen right out of the air. Even the hired guns stared, mesmerized. "My God," Statham whispered. He walked forward, stepping over the threshold of safety, drawn like a moth to a flame. He reached out, his trembling fingers tracing the cold, glittering metal. "It's real. It's actually real. It's the Kincaid legacy, Roman said, his voice low and dangerous. Pure gold and pure curse. Statham laughed, a high, manic sound that bounced off the wet rocks. Curse! This is power! You savage! This is the governorship! This is everything! He turned to his men, his eyes wide and wild. Kill him! Kill him now so we can start digging! Take a look at your feet, Mayor, Roman said calmly. Statham looked down. He was standing 6 inches from the crate of sweating dynamite. The fuse was already hissing, a sparking serpent inching toward the explosive. The color drained from Statham's face. He froze. You're bluffing. You won't kill yourself. You don't have the guts. I died 3 days ago on a gallows you built. Roman grinned, and it was a terrifying sight, a wolf baring its teeth before the kill. I'm just a ghost tying up loose ends. Don't! Statham shrieked, holding up his hands. We can make a deal! Half! I'll give you half! I'll sign the deed over! Just put it out! I don't want the gold, Barnaby, Roman said softly. I just want you off my mountain. Roman raised his rifle, but he didn't aim at Statham. He aimed at the ancient, rotting timber beam directly above the mayor's head, the keystone that held the entire fractured ceiling together. No! Statham screamed. Roman pulled the trigger. The sound of the Winchester was swallowed instantly by a much louder, deeper sound. The timber shattered into splinters. The mountain groaned, a deep, geological roar that vibrated in the marrow of their bones. Run! One of the gunmen yelled. It was too late. The ceiling above Statham sheared off. Tons of granite, slate, and the gold vein itself came crashing down. Statham didn't even have time to cry out before he was erased from the earth, buried under the weight of his own obsession. The shockwave knocked Roman backward. He flew through the air, slamming into the hard dirt floor. Roman! Adeline screamed, abandoning her hiding spot. The entire front of the cave collapsed. A wall of dust and rock sealed the entrance, plunging them into near-total darkness, save for the flickering lantern that had miraculously stayed upright. Adeline crawled through the choking dust, finding Roman half buried under gravel. She clawed at the rocks, weeping, digging him out until she saw his face. He was coughing, blood on his lips, but his eyes were open. I'm all right, he wheezed, struggling to sit up. I'm all right. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the settling of rocks. The shouting outside was gone. Statham and his inner circle were dead. The chimney, Adeline gasped, pulling him up. You said there was a chimney. We have to go. Roman leaned against the rock wall, his face pale and streaked with soot. He looked at the sealed entrance, then back at Adeline. A sad, apologetic smile touched his lips. I lied, he whispered. Adeline froze. The blood ran cold in her veins. What? There is no chimney, Roman said gently. I had to tell you that so you'd move back to safety. I thought the blast would take the whole cavern. I didn't think we'd survive the initial collapse. Adeline looked around the sealed tomb. The air was already getting warmer, the oxygen limited. So we're trapped? You buried us alive? I did what I had to do to save the land, Roman said, sliding down the wall to sit. He looked exhausted, his strength finally failing. At least Statham is gone. I don't care about Statham, Adeline yelled, grabbing his shirt and shaking him. I care about us. Get up. Roman, get up. Adeline, no. She grabbed the lantern and ran to the back of the cave, frantically scanning the walls. You said your father dug this out. He wouldn't build a tomb. There has to be airflow. The lantern. Look at the flame. Roman squinted. The flame of the lantern wasn't standing straight. It was flickering, leaning toward the upper left corner of the cavern ceiling. Air, Roman breathed. He forced himself to his feet, pain shooting through his ribs like a hot poker. He limped over to where Adeline was standing. High up, near the roof, a jagged fissure had opened up from the shock of the explosion. It was small, barely a crack, but through it, they could see a sliver of blue sky. It's 20 feet up, Roman said, assessing the sheer rock wall. Then we climb, Adeline said, tying her skirts up around her knees. I'll go first. I can drop a rope, or my belt. No, Roman shook his head. I boost you. You pull. We do this together. The next hour was a blur of agony and grit. They stacked loose rocks to create a crude platform. Roman groaned as he lifted Adeline onto his uninjured shoulder. She scrabbled at the wet rock, her fingernails tearing, finding tiny holds in the granite. She made it to the ledge. She jammed her boots into a crevice and reached down. "Grab my hand!" Roman jumped, grabbing her wrist. His weight nearly pulled her off the ledge. She screamed with effort, her muscles straining, but she didn't let go. He kicked at the wall, finding purchase, and hauled himself up beside her. They squeezed through the fissure, scraping their skin raw, inching toward the light. And then, suddenly, they were out. They tumbled onto a snowy ledge on the far side of the ridge, lungs burning as they gulped down sweet, cold, fresh air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple. Below them, on the trail, they saw the remaining hired guns. The men were staring at the collapsed mine entrance, shaking their heads. Assuming their boss and their target were both dead, they turned their horses around and began the long ride back to town. They were leaderless and unpaid. The fight had gone out of them. Adeline lay in the snow, laughing hysterically, tears streaming down her face. She was bruised, bleeding, and exhausted, but she had never felt so alive. Roman rolled onto his back next to her. He reached out and found her hand, interlacing their fingers. "The gold!" Adeline gasped, catching her breath. "It's gone. It's all gone." "Good riddance," Roman rumbled, staring up at the vast Wyoming sky. "It was poison. I never wanted it. I just wanted peace." He turned his head to look at her. His blue eyes, usually so cold and guarded, were warm. "I lost the cabin. I lost the mine. I've got nothing left to offer a wife, Adeline. Just a plot of land and a bad reputation." Adeline sat up. She reached into the pocket of her tattered dress and pulled out the crumpled, water-stained letter from Tobias Miller, the safety net she had clung to for so long. She looked at it for a moment, then tore it into pieces. She opened her hand and let the wind catch the confetti, carrying it away over the valley. "You have the land," she said firmly, looking down at him. "You have your name, and you have me." She squeezed his hand. "We can build another cabin, a bigger one, and this time we'll fill it with things that matter." Roman Kincaid, the man who had been caged, hunted, and hanged, sat up and pulled his wife into his arms. He buried his face in her neck, breathing in her scent, sweat, snow, and survival. "Let's go home, Mrs. Kincaid," he whispered against her skin. "I think I've had enough of caves for one lifetime." They stood up together, two battered silhouettes against the setting sun, and began the long walk down the mountain to reclaim what was theirs. And that is how the mail-order bride tamed the beast and buried a tyrant under a mountain of his own greed. Adeline and Roman proved that sometimes the hardest karma is the kind you bring down on yourself. What did you think of Statham's fate? Did he deserve to be buried with the gold he coveted so much? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice, romance, and Wild West revenge, please destroy that like button just like Roman destroyed the gallows. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. We have plenty more tales of satisfying revenge and true love coming your way. Thanks for watching.